Tonight on Free Minds TV, there's good news for marriage equality in the state of New Hampshire. We'll also be talking about how schools in the UK are banning best friends, and Canada abolishes the penny. That's coming up tonight on Free Minds TV.
You have tuned into episode 248 of Free Minds TV, where we challenge you, the viewer, to think outside the box. Is Toby here with you?
And Nick.
All right, Nick, let's start off with a story right in New Hampshire. We'll go over across the pond to the UK in a little bit, but first let's start right here in New Hampshire, where the show is based out of, with some good news. It's always fun to talk about good news happening with gay marriage and, equality. For a number of years now, it seems ever since this red wave of Republicans came in, they supposedly small government Republicans, which they are in some ways, but when it comes to staying out of the bedroom, well, they're all for big government. And they've been pushing and talking about this government getting really involved in the lives of people who want to get married. And if you're not a man and a woman, well, you don't have that right.
Right. I mean, the proposed repeal that was shot down here in New Hampshire had to do with, really it's a game of semantics. And what they were talking about doing was repealing gay marriage and replacing it with civil unions, which would be functionally equivalent to marriage. To be perfectly honest, I'd rather they had gone the other way and actually just labeled all of these things civil unions, meaning for straight couples as well, because it's one little symbolic step saying that I don't think the government really has much place in the marriage debate at all. However, given that they're not going to do that, at least not anytime soon, I think symbolically this was, for this to be called the same thing, for this to be called marriage, for the gay rights community, I think for a majority of people in New Hampshire, it was, it was an issue, albeit a symbolic one. Saying that you had to call it something else, it seemed like, well, we'll let you get the tax breaks and things, but we're still not going to call it marriage. Well,
yeah, because it clearly seems prejudice. You're saying that gay people don't have the same right to marry someone as heterosexuals do. And what you're saying, Nick, is you think the government should completely just butt out of marriage. This should be something that's between people in their church if they want to get married, but the government doesn't have a role in it. If you need something that the government has a role in for legal purposes, insurance purposes, and stuff, you could do that with a civil union. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, basically, what we've been talking about and what a lot of states have implemented is a system where gay couples have civil unions, which entitle under the laws of the state, basically entitle them to all the legal privileges and responsibilities of a married heterosexual couple. Now, I really don't see much of a role for government in defining marriage, period. I think it is, for many people out there watching, a lot of you out there consider marriage to be between one man and one woman, whether it's based on, that's just your personal assertion, your personal philosophy of what marriage should be, or whether it's based on religious doctrine. And frankly, I think that's up to individuals and individual churches and faith groups to decide. I think marriage is a social institution, a religious institution. I don't see how it's really a civic institution. The reason that marriage laws were put on the books was to be able to discriminate against people, was to be able to keep people from marrying, and originally it was to prevent race mixing. I mean, marriage laws exist, marriage licensure exists. Well, some people say it was for health reasons and to prevent incest and things like that. The real reason that it was put on the books was to prevent black people and white people from marrying, particularly in southern states. And it was, it was expanded throughout the rest of the country for various reasons. But that's the origin of having the government involved in marriage.
So the government hasn't been involved in marriage for eons. This is a relatively new institution that the government
I'm pretty sure when George Washington got married, he didn't go to, I guess you would call it the Commonwealth or the colony of Virginia and get a license. That's just something that's what the marriage ceremony was for. That's what the vows were for. It was a contract between two people in front of all the people they cared about. And, if you're religious, as most people of the time were to one degree or another, you were also taking those vows before God. So it was a religious compact, and it was in many senses, a legal contract in the same sense that other agreements made between two people are a legal contract. And that really is the purpose for the vows. And if you want to talk about, certainly the institution of marriage isn't what it used to be in the United States. I don't think it has anything to do with gay marriage or with civil unions. A lot of people talk about the defense of marriage and things like that. Frankly, heterosexual couples managed to screw up the institution of marriage long before gay marriage was even something in the popular debate. And this is something that came about fairly recently, Toby. I mean, 10 years ago, gay marriage wasn't really something I think that was on most people's radar screens, but divorce rates were high. Gay people have nothing to do with the reason why the American family unit has been breaking down, or why marriage doesn't seem to be a favored institution, especially with young people anymore.
Well, I think it became acceptable to get divorced in one sense, and therefore, rather than just sticking it out forever, even though it was probably a loveless marriage in many cases, now people will
well,
get
and
divorced.
I'm not going to say that people should stay in loveless marriages, but to some extent, I think what you talk about with the, you've got more single-parent households, you've got more broken homes, or marriages that end in divorce. And to some extent, the social acceptability of divorce did kind of cheapen the institution of marriage, because, it's a sacred solemn vow that's for life.
But you can always get divorced.
All right, until you change your mind.
Yeah.
And you can do that 3, 4, 5, 6, as many times as you want. It's really, I think the reason that it's lost some of its shine for people is that in practical terms, in the way it's been practiced, marriage itself, even the traditional marriage, even one that you have the ceremony in the church, for many people it doesn't really mean too much, and it certainly doesn't mean that they seriously think that they have to stay with a person for the rest of their lives. So the institution of marriage that we've been talking about, I think some people get confused in this debate, Toby, and they see what's happened to the institution of marriage, and then they see these gay people wanting to get married, which isn't something that used to happen. And they assume that the gay people getting married must have caused a breakdown of the marriage and the family unit, and they have nothing to do with each other.
That seems like a mindless person, Nick. It really does. I'm sorry. How do you equate the two? Really? Do thinking people actually believe this? I know I hear it listening to the right-wing talk radio sometimes, but really? A thinking person can really think that two gay people getting married is going to somehow shake the foundation of the institution of marriage? I've always wondered why people care so much what other people do in their bedrooms. I don't understand, Nick. It boggles my mind, and I guess I never will. One thing that I do think is important to point out, and I know you did touch on it, Nick, is the government being involved in marriage really is, it comes from a place of prejudice. It's always been done to discriminate against people in some way or another. So discrimination, if you're trying to wipe it out, well, you've got to start cutting the government out of certain institutions where it just doesn't belong. You have to look at the roots of why it was put there, like why the government got involved in the first place, and what it's doing there right now. Could we have institutions of marriage that are worth just as much, if not more, without the government? I definitely think so. Could we be getting away from all this discriminatory rhetoric? Absolutely. Definitely. Then it could be up to individuals and churches and everyone else if they want to marry certain people. But yeah, I think you've made a good point there, Nick, where the government really doesn't have any business being in the institution of marriage, because they're just using it as a tool to hurt other people right now. That's the only purpose of the government being there, is to hurt others.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's about control, and that's what it was about. I mean, that's why you have licensure laws, period. So beyond that, I don't know why you would have a licensure law, and it wasn't necessary at one point. It really, public officials didn't see the need until they saw, as I said, interracial marriage was really the reason why the early marriage licensure laws were adopted. And they didn't really see a need to adopt those kinds of regulations until they saw people getting married that they didn't want to get married. And in that case, it was out of a concern that, and remember, this was a popular position among people in government at one point. They were concerned that it would lead to race mixing, which was presumptively a bad thing at the time. If especially if you were a Southern legislator, it was probably a bad thing. And the idea was that society would collapse if people of different races married. it was much the same rhetoric you hear today as if people of the same gender marry. Society is going to collapse, and it's going to ruin our institutions, and it'll be bad news for everybody. And of course, that's not the case. It's not the case with interracial marriage, and it's not the case with same-sex marriage.
Well, maybe, Nick.
But like I said, if people don't have to agree with me on a personal level about gay marriage. I'm perfectly fine with you belonging to a church that doesn't do those kinds of ceremonies.
Sure.
I don't care whether you call it marriage or not. I really am not concerned with that. I just think it would be a lot easier if we got this out of the public debate.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Nick. Well, maybe the reason society is collapsing is not because of gay marriage. Maybe it's for another reason. Over in the UK, they think they have it pinned. Is it because of best friends? Yes, UK schools may be trying to curb bullying by banning best friends. UK schools over in the UK, UK schools over in the UK, they are telling students that they must not play in groups of twos, but rather they must play with varying numbers of students because, well, having a single best friend, it has many drawbacks. What happens, for example, when that friendship dissolves and the kids are no longer friends with each other? Imagine the hurt that can come from that. What happens when people are best friends and they all pair up and someone else is left alone on the playground and they don't have a best friend to play with? There's going to be hurt there as well. So we'll fix all this by telling students who they can be friends with, and that will solve society's ills and problems, and we'll have a bunch of kids who grow up without knowing how relationships work and thinking that they're going to be happy by having someone else find them a playmate. And I very worrisome when they get into high school and post-secondary schooling or the workforce. I'm not really sure what's going to happen then, but wow, this is like those safe playgrounds times 10. I mean, you're now moving into the psychological realm, where best friendships are very important. I mean, if you look at what the psychologists say, they say, well, yes, having best friends and watching those relationships dissolve and forming new friendships is extremely important because it teaches children how relationships work and how to navigate those complicated relationships at a young age rather than waiting until you're older and it's like the entire world collapsing around you if you're 20 and you find out that relationships sometimes don't work out forever. So, well, I get what they're doing, but wow, is it backwards.
And you also have to consider, Toby, and I don't have a background in psychology, but when I hear that what they're trying to do or the behavior they're trying to prevent, it doesn't just work that way in elementary school. I think in most of our relationships, whether they're just friendships or whether you're talking about intimate relationships or even business relationships, I think there are typically people who you prefer to work with, you prefer to spend time with, and you're not going to have friends who you want to spend time with 100% equally. And I'm not sure that basically every area of our lives works that way, where we have a rank order of friends, because that's how, I mean, we do create lists of importance in terms of our relationships with people. Is it possible that human beings do that because it serves a social function? I mean, this behavior seems to be pretty commonplace from what I've seen, cross-culturally. I just don't, is it possible that maybe the way humans behave is the proper behavior for human beings, and maybe there's a reason that we're perhaps wired to behave that way?
Well, yes and no. I mean, also the way humans behave is by clubbing their enemies over the head.
Okay,
so
but
yes and no, evolution comes into play in certain areas and not.
But assuming it's not an innate human trait that causes grievous bodily harm or riotous social disorder, do you think maybe there's a reason why people have best friends? Because I think that's pretty common behavior. And maybe it's normal. Maybe it's normal.
And these friendships, they ebb and they flow. They dissolve. And this is so highly important for kids to learn through elementary school, middle school, into high school. I mean, you need to learn how relationships work, how they function. It can't be the adults telling kids who they can and can't be friends with, who they're allowed to play with at recess and sit with at lunchtime. I mean, they need to have independence. I mean, it's one of the basic human needs is a need for independence and autonomy and to go out into the world and see how it works and play around and fail. That's a human need to learn from so you can adapt into an ever-changing world, a complicated world. And if you don't learn those things at a young age, well, you're going to be screwed when you become an adult.
The world is a cruel place, and you should learn how to deal with it. But you know, I think that when we've seen these moves towards political correctness or towards the the ultra safety conscious approach to things like playground design, I think you're seeing a desire to shelter, especially children, from as you're pointing out, everything that could possibly go wrong, so they don't develop those coping skills. That's one unintended consequence. But I think more generally, when you look at the political correctness movement and the general vein of thought that this is coming from, they're trying to alleviate social ills. I mean, just with drastic overreactions that have unintended consequences, which I think are a lot worse. And to say that having a best friend is equivalent to beating another child up, or teasing them persistently on the playground, number one, I don't understand the rationale. I think it's a false leap to make in logic. And number two, are you considering the downsides to creating an environment where nobody has best friends, or where nobody can take risks on a playground as a child? No, you're not. Frankly, there's not a whole lot of foresight. There's not a whole lot of big picture thinking here. This is
right.
They're just burying their face right up against the issue and not looking at the big picture.
You can't see the forest from the trees. And a good point here, I think, is that these policymakers, they're coming from a place where they are actually caring about the kids, I think. I don't think that there's any malicious intent here to do harm. What they are doing is trying to protect children. But there comes an overprotecting of children. You don't want to do it. We've talked about many studies on this show that talk about the safe playgrounds and the ability for children to take risks and know what it's like to have scraped knees or fall down off the monkey bars or go too fast off the big metal slide. I mean, I remember when parks here in Keene, New Hampshire, they had giant metal slides and monkey bars in them. And those were taken away because of health and safety reasons. I mean, because you don't want kids to get too badly hurt. Lots of that is lawsuits and insurance. I understand that as well. But if you look at some of the other reasonings, it's because they don't think that kids should be able to take these risks. What happens when the kids become adults who didn't have the opportunity to take risks on the playground and running around outside and climbing trees? Well, they don't know their limits, and they get behind the wheel of a vehicle, or they go and they drink to excess, and then they test out their limits. It doesn't make for a safe adult. A safe child, I guess, equates to a dangerous adulthood because you don't know your limitations. And same with relationships. You need to know your limitations. You need to take risks in relationships. You need to fail. You need all these things. I mean, I'd much rather start with my dog dying than my parents dying. Like that baby step of losing a best friend before you get into high school and lose the love of your life. I mean, these are baby steps, and you learn about closure and risks and assessment and all this other stuff as a kid. We can't overprotect them. I guess that's my spiel.
Yeah, and I think we are, well, many people don't realize it, I think we are paying a price for that now. The last 10 years haven't been a cakewalk, but I don't think that the younger generation was as well prepared as perhaps some generations that came before. Not that we should want to go back to the 1950s or the 1940s, but when you look at the way people dealt with things like, I don't know, settling the entire continent in the span of a couple generations, or the Great Depression, or World War II, I just don't know whether you want to call it toughness or coping skills or self-confidence. I just don't know that. I feel like we have lost some of that essence if you're looking generally.
Sure.
Generational level. And I think it does have something to do with this helicopter parenting and this desire to completely shelter children. These children are going to be adults one day. They are going to be running the world.
And then instead of going out and learning the hardships of the world that has a struggling economy globally, instead of going out and finding a job and working through it and biting your lip and just pressing forward, you're going to be out in a park protesting the 1%. This is why I feel, can I just go on a little rant about the 1% I've been thinking about? Okay, these 99%, yeah, I get it. Yeah, horrible, 1%, they suck. Yes, absolutely. I can't feel bad for the people in the parks, though. You know why? You're able to not have a job and live in a park and not starve to death. Life's not that tough. 50 years ago, Nick, if you chose not to work and go sit in a park all day and hold a sign and smoke dope and say, oh, 1% are holding me down, well, you'd starve to death. Now you manage to have a big old belly and a mind filled with drugs. So I can't feel too bad for you. I'm sorry. I can't. You're a bunch of people who need to just grow up and go find a job. Yeah, it's tough, but there's jobs out there. Plenty of them if you try. They're not the best paying. You really need to work harder now than you did before, but give me a break. I see now hiring signs everywhere, and then people, oh, it's so hard to get a job. Yeah, it's hard to get a job. Life is hard. to be honest, in our local area, you hear that a lot. And I've looked at the unemployment rate, and locally it's like 4.5%. It's actually around like the historical median. If you look back over the last 10, 15 years, it's really not that bad of a job market. It's just kind of average. Yeah, the jobs just stink. The jobs are low paying and they're hard.
Right, and there are legitimate reasons to be upset. But you know,
but by being a bum in a park,
right? And that's the issue.
What are you accomplishing? Some great utopia where all the billionaires of the world are going to go, oh, you protested in a park. You know what? This capitalism thing, I was wrong. I see the error of my ways. You know what? I'm going to dissolve my company. Here, have my money, and you never have to work again.
Yeah, and I think the unfortunate thing about that, Toby, is, and the point you make is a good one. Things really aren't that bad because you're not going to starve to death. These are not food riots we're having. These are college kids. This is
lazy person.
This is large. This is, well, it's mostly
when they're hungry, they go to the dining commons and they swipe their card.
That mom and dad probably paid for,
and they get
with the money they made working for
eat meal
for a Fortune 500. But yeah, but the point is, Toby, I do think that if you look at the world that we're heading into here, you know, for the rest of this century, people coming of age right now are probably in for a rough ride. I hate to say it, but these 10 years are probably not the worst. You know, the past 10 years haven't been great. There have been wars. There have been, you know, the greatest economic downturn since the Great Depression. All those
pestilence, measles.
No pestilence. Yeah, that might pop up too. But
what is pestilence?
It's plague. But
reports in other countries.
Other countries where they don't have as much money. Other countries where they do have real problems.
This isn't funny.
But no, I do think that if you look at some of the overall trends, things are going to get tougher. You know, whether you're a working class person in America or anybody around the world, I think there's some population trends, some energy trends, just some macro things that we're going to bump off a big ceiling here is how I feel.
Have you seen the size of the giant plastic island in the middle of the ocean, Nick? It's miles thick.
I'm not so much worried about the plastic, but it's more about where we get oil to make more plastic.
From the plastic in the ocean? No.
Well, maybe one
Well, Nick, we're not going to solve these issues now or ever. We're just going to suffer through them. But something that is worrying me, a big worry to me. You've got the story in front of you. I don't know what to make of it quite yet. It's not in the U.S., but it's creepy. It's a general creep. We talk about the creep. Other countries a little bit ahead of us on the curve of some things. What's going to happen to the value of my coin collection when the U.S. gets rid of its penny? Canada just did it.
Well,
got the story.
And Canada
What's it mean for my coin collection is what I want to know.
I don't know what it means for your coin collection because I don't know what coins you have.
I have pennies, lots of pennies.
Well, you can still collect the pennies. They're not outlawing pennies. What the government of Canada is doing is abolishing the issue of new pennies effective. It's this year, I believe it's this fall. CTV News reporting that the government has decided that the lowest denomination coin in Canada is more trouble than it's worth, so the Royal Canadian Mint will stop distributing the penny this fall. It's a currency without currency, Finance Minister Jim Flaherty said Thursday, and this is an insanely logical step, Toby. Pennies are worthless.
Except for my coin collection.
This is a quote here from the Finance Minister in Canada, where they're actually making some pretty deep budget cuts, by the way. And have a much better looking economy than ours. Pennies take up too much space on our dressers at home. They take up far too much time for small businesses trying to grow and create jobs, he said in prepared remarks. It costs taxpayers a penny and a half every time we make one. We will, therefore, stop making them. And that's true in the United States, too. It costs more than a penny just to make the penny, because that's how little the penny is worth. It didn't always used to be that way. The Canadian penny has retained only about 5% of its value since its original issue. The U.S. penny has been around a lot longer, since we've been an independent country for a lot longer. I don't know how much of that. I mean, the U.S. dollar has lost it's only retained about 3% of its purchasing power since 1913, so about 100 years ago. So I'm not sure how long the Canadian penny's been around, but, it's worth, thanks to the fact the American dollar isn't worth that much more than the Canadian dollar, about 1 cent.
Sure. I guess I do collect some of the new pennies. Every time a new date comes out, I buy the bank rolls of them just to put away. I don't know, it's like OCD type thing, but you're right. The new pennies, they're not worth anything. Every time I get pennies, I actually check them for anything that's worth something.
They almost feel like plastic now. Have you noticed that they've gotten lighter? I think they went to even more zinc.
One of these stories I read on the U.S. penny about its demise said that the penny is so beautiful and majestic, and I was looking at a penny and it's like the new Shield penny is ugly.
Oh yeah, it's butt ugly, and it feels fake.
Have people seen the coins from the prior to 1950?
Yeah, they were nice. Of course, we still had commodity-backed money. We still had gold and silver-backed money.
It's still design. I don't care about that as much.
There's a big difference. When you hold a silver penny silver quarter looks a heck of a lot better than these new friggin' even the state issue ones.
Well, don't you have the state? I have all the state silver ones, and they're a much nicer feel to them. So, yeah.
There is a serious issue underlying this whole thing. That would be the devaluation of the U.S. dollar.
It's a penny in the bucket, no pun intended. Businesses taking up their precious time counting
I'm not talking about the penny issue. I'm talking about the devaluation of the currency.
Oh, yeah, that's a big issue. But give me a break.
I'm talking about the nature of money. But the penny argument? No, it costs a penny and a half to make the thing. It just doesn't make sense.
How much are they losing?
My idea is just stop issuing. By the way, just a quick breakdown. They'll be rounding down transactions. Like if it's $1.27, they'll be rounding them to the nearest 5 cents. So a $1.27 cup of coffee is $1.25. $1.28 is $1.30.
Who's deciding that?
Huh? The government just said that.
The government tells the business?
Nearest 5 cent increment.
Oh, that's interesting. Because that was an argument I heard here. They're going to gouge the poor with the loss of the penny. How much are they really going to gouge the poor? My upsetness is this, Nick. I'm going back to my coin collection. Will they be issuing special pennies still for collectors when this happens in the U.S.? I don't collect Canadian pennies, but I am concerned about what happens here. I would like them to continue issuing kind of like they're doing with the new dollars. The new dollars, they're issuing special issues. They're not sending them to banks anymore, but you can still buy them from the mint for a limited time. Anyways, it's an important issue. My coin collection, more important than the others. If I haven't made that clear. We're out of time this week. Tune into episode 250. Special announcement coming up. Until next week, it's been Toby here with you.
And Nick.
Have a good one.